Today, I'm going to talk about theistic evolution and how it works. Welcome to Missing the Mark, where we look for meaning in strange places. I'm Christopher. I got a request from Skydancer90 to talk about theistic evolution in specific because a lot of people just sort of gloss over it, pointing out that it works or that evolution doesn't pose any problem to Christianity, at least Orthodox Christianity, little o Orthodox Christianity, and tend to leave it there, and he'd like to see some elaboration on this. So I will do that. Quick note, by the way, just remember, since I'm actually going to be talking about scripture in some depth, is that I'm a layman and do not speak with authority. So for my sake, at least, remember this, if not for your own, although for both would be best. Okay, so the first thing about evolution, by the way, see my video about how the beginning of the book of Genesis is in the genre of mythology, which, in case you haven't seen it, just real briefly, is a thing in which you use a narrative structure in order to convey important truths about something that actually is or something that actually happened, but where the narrative is not concerned with the details of what does not matter to the truth being conveyed. Because narrative conveys vastly more truth than does any kind of abstraction, and narrative is vastly easier to understand than is any kind of abstraction. And so by using a narrative structure, you are able to convey truths to people without requiring decades and decades of study and preparation to be able to understand accurately the abstract communication involved. Okay, so that's mythology. Something important you have to remember about mythology is that it's not attempting in any way to be a recounting of details that if you were there you would have seen this. That is entirely missing the point, because for the most part, those sorts of details, it would take astonishing numbers of those details to get you anywhere at all in terms of actually understanding anything. And most people can't even remember enough of them to really put it together very well. Narrative, mythology uses narrative to vastly simplify these things into what actually matters. And one way, just briefly, that you know that this is not a modern recreation of an experience style account where it's the factual accuracy that what matters to the narrative, is the fact that you have two things in what's generally called chapter 1 and chapter 2 that directly contradict each other in a factual sort of sense. There's no way to reconcile the order of these two accounts. So this can't be something where the particular details matter because the details literally contradict each other. So okay, so how do we look at this for what are the actual truths that are being conveyed? Okay, so let's start at the beginning. In the beginning, God created the heavens and earth. And the earth. Now, right there, by the way, this situates God as the creator of everything. God is not one among many things. God is not something dependent upon anything else. Everything is dependent upon God. This stands in contrast to your typical creation mythology, by the way. Okay. The earth was without form and void, and the darkness was upon the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God was moving over the face of the waters. And God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. Okay, so now some very important things that just happened. You'll notice that so God created everything, but God created everything first as a formless. The earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the earth. So we have an initial creation, but that creation is sort of a primal chaos. Now, what happens next? God says, "Let there be light," and there was light. God speaks light into being. Things are being created according to a rational ordering. And we see an improvement on creation. So creation starts without very much of doesn't have any form, it doesn't have anything really worth talking about. And now something is added to it, where now it has something more. Now we have light. So we have God creating everything. We have that thing beginning in a basic sort of formless, chaotic sort of way. And now we see order being brought to the chaos according to the rational plan of God. And again, not violently, but rather in the manner that an author writes a novel. God speaks the world into being according to this rational plan that he has. Now, and God saw that the light was good, and God separated the light from the darkness. God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. There was evening and there was morning one day. Okay. So, what do we have? We have the development of this. We have another thing being created. We have the relationship of the things. We have the bringing to order of that primal chaos. Now, and God said, let there be a firmament in the midst of the waters, and let it separate the waters from the waters. And God made the firmament, and separated the waters which were under the firmament from the waters which were above the firmament. And it was so. And God called the firmament heaven. And there was evening and there was morning a second day. So again, we see additional ordering brought to this primal chaos. And God said, let the waters under the heavens be gathered together into one place, and let the dry land appear. And it was so. God called the dry land earth, and the waters that were gathered together he called the seas. Okay, and so it proceeds. So you see that there is a process, a progression of ordering of God first creates the primal chaos, and then brings order to this primal chaos according to a rational plan. And you can see this is according to the rational plan, both because he speaks it and because he is naming everything. Each thing has a name. It is a coherent being that actually means something, hence it gets a name. So you have the reality of the being that is being created out of the primal chaos that God himself has made. And so it goes on, and you see order is being brought, and more order and greater being it comes about. You have the fishes of the sea and dry land. Okay, and then all the kinds, and the cattle according to their kinds, and everything that creeps upon the ground according to its kind. And God saw that it was good. Then God said, let us make man in our image, after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the air, and over the cattle, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps upon the earth. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God he created them. Male and female he created them. And God blessed them, and God said to them, be fruitful and multiply, and fill the earth and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the air, and over every living thing that moves upon the earth, etc. Okay, so again, we have the ordering of creation according to a rational plan where you start, God first creates a primal chaos, and God then brings order to this primal chaos over time. The pinnacle of this ordering, the pinnacle of this ordering of things according to the rational plan being the creation of human beings, the pinnacle of the things made within the earth. And then there is and then this pinnacle is also to have dominion over it. That is to say that you have within this rational ordering that the greater is meant to care for the lower. So that you have not, that you have here a subsidiary action. That man is to be lord over creation as an underlord, essentially, to God. You have within it what you see in Christianity of that the higher is meant to care for the lower. You see it right here. And you also see that what you have is an increase, that things progress according to God's plan, getting better and better. And then what do you have at the end of it? Yada yada, and it was so. And God saw everything that he had made, and behold, it was very good. Here we get the amplifier from the previous 5 days. It was good. Here it is very good. So again, just driving home the point that this is a progress of things improving over time according to God's rational plan. Alrighty. So, and thus the heavens and the earth were finished, and all the host of them, etc. And then God rested on the seventh day. I'll get to that later because that's not really about the evolution per se, or it's not going to be very important. I mean, there's tons and tons of things to say about it because it conveys all sorts of amazing truths about the universe, but it is not here very applicable to the moment of simply about evolution. So what do we have? Well, we have, again, that rational plan, that progression, that improvement. Does this sound like evolution? Yeah. I mean, assuming evolution to be directed towards some end, yes. Yes, we do. You will occasionally find people who will say, but it's a core tenet of evolution that it has no direction. But no, it's not. Not the biological theory of evolution. The atheist creation myth of evolution, yes, it is a core tenet of the atheist creation myth of evolution that evolution is completely undirected. But, yeah, it's just that creation myth. If you look at the actual scientific idea, well, no, there's no There's no referent one way or another to whether or not there's any direction to how things are selected and so on. There is only the idea that you have allele frequency changing within a population within time, plus some minor observations that if a thing leads to something dying before it can reproduce, obviously doesn't show up in the gene pool as often as something which does it, some stuff like that. But you have a rational progression of things gaining features, getting more complex, etc. The straight. I mean, I kind of take this to be obvious how those things are compatible with each other. Let's look at the other creation myth that we have here. These are the generations of the heavens and the earth when they were created. In the day that the Lord God made the earth and the heavens, when no plant of the field was yet in the earth, and no herb in the field had yet sprung up, for the Lord God hadn't yet caused it to rain, etc. The Lord God formed man of dust from the ground, and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living soul. And the Lord God planted a garden in Eden in the east, and there he put the man whom he had formed. And out of the ground the Lord God made grow every tree that is pleasing to the sight and good for food, and the tree of life also in the midst of the garden, and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Now this account is going to work into the fall of man, which we'll come to momentarily. But again, very important point here, man was formed from the dust of the ground. That is to say, from things that were not human, but things that pre-existed, things that were matter, from the material world. God formed man and then breathed life into him. Something you have to remember is in most of the ancient languages, the word for spirit and the word for breath is basically the same word. If memory serves, it's something like ruach in Hebrew, spiritus in, I think it's spiritus, I believe, in Latin, psyche. Oh shoot, is it psyche in Greek? I think so. I haven't gotten much sleep lately and my memory is failing me. I apologize. But again, in Greek, the word for spirit and the word for breath, not that there was literally only one word for both, but there's a word that again means both. And the point is, breath and spirit are similar ideas to each other. Again, the reason, by the way, or part of the reason why, is that breath is something that you can't see. It is real, it moves, it does things, but you can't see it. And also breath is that thing which distinguishes a corpse from somebody who's alive. A corpse doesn't breathe. Somebody who's alive does breathe. So you can tell the difference between a living person and a corpse by whether or not they have breath. That's not, by the way, that anyone had any weird conception that like the breath is actually like the soul or something. No, nothing like that. Just that the two are linked concepts. And so they make great metaphors, is the important part. And so God breathed spirit up the nostrils of this, of the man that was formed just from the dust. That is to say, so God took the primal matter that he created and then formed it. He gave it form and then he gave it life. He gave spirit to the matter that he had shaped. Again, do you see this in evolution? Yeah, you do. You see this very, very straightforwardly in that you have matter, which takes the form of animals, and animals proceed according to the rational plan, getting ever more complex until they become a fit vessel for the human soul, which then gets put into human beings. So, yeah, there you go. Theistic evolution, again, our bodies are evolved, and then God breathes into us our souls, which, look around, it just, it fits so beautifully well. Okay, I'm going to skip over a little bit so the naming of all the animals and stuff is, again, just like that human beings are given dominion over it, that we, as the highest of the created things that have flesh, order that which is lower than us. And in this you see, of course, the technical term is secondary causation. I like to call it delegation just because it's a more natural English term for it. But where God gives it to us to be part of his act of creation. So God gives it to us to give to all of the animals and plants and so on their meaning, to give to them the fullness of their being which God has given to them, but has given it to us to be a conduit through which this being flows into them, so that we can have that higher good of being part of God's act of creation. Okay. So, and again, as you look around and look at like when people train animals, how much more full the animals become under human training, how much more they're able to do, etc. It's, again, it just seems to be a little bit obvious. I don't want to belabor it because there's a lot to go through here. But again, you can see this, and you can see it all around, that like trained animals are just capable of so much more than our untrained animals. We are able to impart to other animals more than they themselves are capable of on their own. We fill up their being so that they are more full. That's the dominion over them, but that's also the giving of the name to them, because the name contains the name is the signifier of your being. It's the rational description of your being. So yeah, okay. So you see that. Okay, then again, in this version, a woman is made for man, which again is just really highlighting that. You'll see some accounts where the whole men are from Mars, women are from Venus thing is not exactly original, or is not exactly new, and so human beings, male and female, are actually of the same sort of substance, just affirmed over again, just an important point. And lo and behold, within evolutionary science, we're the same species. Yeah, there you go. All right, now we get to the fall, because the fall is the other part that can cause people trouble. All right, so in the fall, what do we have? Well, okay, now the serpent was more subtle than any other wild creature that the Lord God had made. He said to the woman, "Did God say you shall not eat of the tree of the garden?" By the way, if you read fully, no, he didn't. And the woman said to the serpent, "We may eat of the fruit of the trees of the garden, but God said, you shall not eat of the fruit of the tree which is in the midst of the garden. Neither shall you touch it, lest you die." Now, as a detail, that's not in fact what was said. It's just okay, so I'll just read that part. "And the Lord God commanded the man, saying, You may freely eat of every tree of the garden, but of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil you shall not eat. From the day that you eat of it, you shall die." Okay, by the way, you notice there was no mention of it being in the center of the garden. In point of fact, actually, it was mentioned, and the tree of life also in the midst of the garden, and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. So right away, there's some miscommunication. Adam didn't do a really good job of catechizing Eve, which you can see right there. So there's a failure to transmit the fullness of what's supposed to be, and then the serpent took advantage of this by asking a loaded leading question. Okay. "But the serpent said to the woman, You will not die, for God knows that when you eat of it, your eyes will be opened, and you'll be like God, knowing good and evil." Okay, so again, you have something. Okay, I'm sorry. Again, you have the issue of here you have a quibbling on words, taking advantage of Eve's ignorance as to what is meant. That and actually, the way she put it, "The day you eat of it, you shall surely die." Now, you can take this in the sense that the day you eat of it, you're going to drop dead, and but you can also take it in the sense that this is how. If you do this, then you are doomed to die. Now, there's another thing we're going to have to get to in a second, because we're going to talk about the introduction of death into the world, which means we have to talk about what death is, but I want to hold off on that for 1 second. There's an important point here that you have to notice, that the first sin of man and woman is not the first sin in the world. The serpent is not meaning well here. And so the serpent, which I mean, everyone, as they interpret this, does not take it to literally mean a serpent, which, by the way, is not even at this point a thing that crawls on its belly. Anyway, nobody takes it to be an animal, but rather to be the cleverest of all of the serpent was more subtle than any other wild creature the Lord God had made. Now, everyone always takes this, though you don't have to take it. It can be a little bit more complex than this with more layers, but essentially everyone takes this to be the devil, a fallen angel. Angels, you will remember, are creatures of intellect but without body. They are higher than us. They have greater intellects than we do. They are more powerful creatures than we are. You can very easily, just as a detail, take this that the devil was possessing or otherwise taking advantage of, guiding one of the wild animals. There's no particular need to do that. I just want to point out that you don't need to make this simple. That's just a really convenient way to sort of cut to the chase, as it were, to make it easier to understand. Anyway, the point here, okay, with regard to death. Now, I'm sorry. So with regard to death entering the world, because there's the question of, is this the death just of human beings, or is the death of all animals? Okay, so if you look at all animals, there are two things that are going to come about. But one important thing is that human beings are not the first sin of all of creation. The first sin, the original sin of Adam and Eve, is the first sin in human beings. And this has its effect on everything that human beings have dominion over. Although one of the things you have to bear in mind, of course, is that human beings don't have dominion until they're created, at least in the first creation account, which is the one that's more concerned with the nature of progressive creation. Human beings are only given dominion after human beings are created. And so the disordering of the world because of the human disorder is itself something that would only take place once human beings are created. Now, that is not to say, by the way, that they could not have been, the animals could not have been disordered by a higher power, such as by by the devil, by demons, etc., by fallen angels, prior to human beings being given dominion over them, and that human beings could have been responsible for restoring them. For example, this is one of the things that's it's not specified, so there are a bunch of different options, and I'm going to describe a few of the different options. This is not casting about, but rather that because it's not specified, there are a few different ways that this could go, and we just don't know. Anyway, so that's one of them, that because you see that human sin is not the first sin that exists within creation, as is described in the book of Genesis, we do not know to what degree this sin applied to other things as human beings were being created. So the answer could be a bunch. Next thing we have to consider with regard to the entrance of death into the world is what death is. And I know that can sound a little bit silly, but you have to actually kind of, because we only know one kind of death. But it's important to consider because we're considering before what the world was like before what we're used to. And so before the fall, when things are perfect, that does not mean that they are permanent. See, remember that the nature of that first story, in the first the first 6 days, is that of change. Things are changing. There comes into being the primal chaos, and then the primal chaos, which is just dark, now there is light and dark, and now there's and then there's the ordering into day and night, and then there's the creation of things like the sun and the moon to govern these things. And so on, it proceeds. And it proceeds. Now, in each case, what you have is a change. You have the changing of things. And when you have the birds getting created, and the plants and the animals, the plants and fishes, birds, animals, and so on. And one of the things, like, it's even mentioned. Oh, and God said, Behold, I have given you every plant yielding seed which is upon the face of all the earth, and every tree with seed in its fruit, that you shall have them for food. And to every beast of the earth, and to every bird of the air, and to everything that creeps on the earth, everything that has the breath of life, I have given every green plant for food. And it was so. Okay, so you have within there's no way you can eat a plant and not destroy it. That is to say, there's no way you can eat a plant and the plant's being not continue. And trust me, everyone knew that plants were alive. So you have the ending of life within the context of plant. I mean, you can work it out in ways that wouldn't exactly be required, but you have, in general, the ending of things as they change. The world is a temporary place that changes, and every change is the destruction of at least the particular configuration that had come before. So, you have to draw a distinction between change and death. And you have to draw the distinction rather particularly that that a thing coming to an end is not the same as a thing dying if it comes to its end as it is supposed to come to its end. If it is fulfilling its telos and then is over with, that is not the thing dying in the same sense that we mean death, because what we mean of death is a thing that breaks down and can no longer continue living. By death, what we actually mean is the disordered end of a thing, that at the end of its days, these days, within what, the world as we experience it, a man dies because he no longer has the power to continue to live. He breaks down. He is failing. And that is what we experience death as, and that's what we mean by death, is that disorder. Hence, by the way, the doctrine of the dormition of Mary, the assumption of Mary into heaven is another description of this. But the dormition of Mary, that Mary fell asleep in the Lord, that essentially she just went to sleep and then was done and went straight to heaven. Why? Well, because this world is temporary, and even perfect things are temporary within this world. This world is the gradual unfolding of creation into the fullness of its being, but then it's going to make a transition into eternity. It cannot be in the fullness of its being if it's constantly changing. That's not the nature of a changeable thing. And so we have to transition from this temporary world into eternity. Now, we enter into eternity by dying, but absent the dysfunction, we would still have to stop being in this temporary world and become in eternity, outside of time, into the fullness of being, where all the moments of our being shattered over time are gathered together into a cohesive whole. And so you have the dormition of Mary, where Mary simply fell asleep and then was in heaven because she, being sinless, did not fail through dysfunction, but the end of her days had come, and so she made that transition. And it's it's a little bit like how you can draw a very, very, very imperfect analogy to how a soldier can either come to the end of the term for which he signed up and then be discharged, or he can be wounded and thus be discharged because he is no longer fit for service. So a person might be sent home from the army because he had either served out his term and is done and then moves on, or because, a bomb exploded next to him and now he's missing an arm and a leg, and he is sent home because he can't possibly do any good fighting. There's a very, very loose analogy here to falling asleep in the Lord and to death, where the one is your time has come to an end through dysfunction, and the other is your time has come to its natural end, and then you just move on. Again, very, very imperfect analogy, but it does kind of work. Okay, so, because obviously evolution, the evolution of things like predators and so on involves one thing eating another, very clearly. Now, I'm actually slightly overstating things there. I personally believe that when you see all of the various teeth that look like they're meant for eating other animals, that this does in fact mean that these things were meant for eating other animals, and these things in fact did. You have to bear in mind that we have absolutely no knowledge of this. We're just looking at skeletons. We do not know. I mean, there are some things, some additional evidence, for example, where you can find some of the bones of another thing within one of them. But even there, you really have zero proof that the one killed the other, rather than, say, ate it after it died. For, just to give an example, they could have been scavengers when the one thing came to an end, etc. I mean, there's also other things like you could have accidental eating. So to be strictly accurate, my belief that it is extremely likely that there were predators, long before there were human beings, is, I think, a very good guess that is well supported by the evidence, but it is not, in fact, guaranteed that that's the case. So I don't want to overstep what the historical evidence actually shows in those cases. And as a side note, if you look at, say, like a modern iguana, it has nasty teeth, and they are vegetarians. I mean, everything will eat the occasional bug. You don't really find, vegans in the natural world, as someone said. But that aside, green iguanas, there are lots of iguanas, green iguanas in particular, they're the ones that are really common but shouldn't be in the pet trade. Various reasons, don't want to get into it. But the point is, their teeth are sharp, crazy sharp, unbelievably sharp, sliced through flesh like you would not believe. But they eat all plants, or approximately all plants in the wild. And the reason their teeth are so sharp is to cut through leaves. So the mere fact that you see, but if you look at their teeth, they're scary looking. And if you ever get bitten by one, you will find out they cut through skin real well. So the mere fact that something looks rather remarkably like it to be good at rending flesh doesn't mean that it actually did. Okay, so I just want to be fair to, I think it were predators, personally, my own guess. But I want to be fair to the counterpoint that we just don't actually know. Okay, so here's the thing. So if we assume predators, because this is in some case the most difficult, in some sense the most difficult case. So if we assume that there are predators, you still do not have the assumption, or you still do not have built in the nature of things as dying, because this could be their natural function. If this is their natural function, then they are not coming to the end of their days dysfunctionally, which is what death really is. They are coming to the end of their days naturally, which is not death. It is a transition, but it's not death in the sense that we mean it, because it's not coming to the end of their days through a failure to actually be what they're supposed to be. So it's something you have to bear in mind when it comes to that the death that is described, and I've heard the distinction between like physical death and spiritual death, but and I think to some degree that's trying to get at the same idea, but the actual real concept here, or the real distinction to draw, is that between a temporary thing coming to its close according to how it's supposed to come to its close, within its nature and according to its telos is given to it by God. Telos being the natural end. And a thing failing to come to its natural end, ending in some way other than its natural end. So, in terms of when did death come into the world, clearly what is being described here is death as dysfunction. That amongst other things, Adam and Eve didn't just go like, thump. When they ate of the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And by the way, it is almost bizarre to me that people tend to interpret this as an actual literal fruit. Because the language is so thickly symbolic here. What happens when you eat something? You make it a part of yourself. So what happens when you eat the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil? You make the knowledge of good and evil part of yourself. Well, what is the knowledge of evil being part of you? That's sinning. That's sin. The only one who can do this without sin is God, because God is in all things, sustaining them in their existence. God is our existence, and so God can know sin without being sin, because God is sustaining our existence, and sin is a privation. So God is not being privated through his sustaining of the existence of all things, of being their existence, of giving to them their existence in every moment, as each moment changes into each next moment, and why there is a moment at all. And so, if you're a creature, however, what this means is that you made evil a part of yourself. I mean, the language is, as I said, very thickly symbolic here. Okay, so, all right, there's another thing I really want to draw attention to that's coming up shortly here. So we have Cain and Abel, okay, which I don't want to get into the specifics of Cain and Abel, okay, so, and again, like, you have some massive theological problems, though, if you take the story of Cain and Abel as if it was like a newspaper-style account of what happened, because then you're going to have things like God not knowing something, but hearing of it from from Abel's blood calling to him from the field, which is just theologically untenable. It's mythology. As mythology, it is rich in meaning and deeply significant and all very true. As a genre that did not exist at the time, it doesn't work. Okay, so by the way, this is a digression. Keep it super brief. It's really fascinating that the mark of Cain is actually, by the way, it's not a punishment. The mark of Cain, here, look at it. My punishment, what have you done? The voice of your brother's blood is crying to me from the ground, and now you are cursed from the ground, which has opened its mouth to receive your brother's blood from your hand. When you till the ground, it shall no longer yield to you its strength. You shall be a fugitive and a wanderer on the earth. Cain said to the Lord, my punishment is greater than I can bear. Behold, you have driven me this day away from the ground, and from your face I shall be hidden. I shall be a fugitive and a wanderer on the earth, and whoever finds me will slay me. Then the Lord said to him, not so. If anyone slays Cain, vengeance shall be taken on him sevenfold. And the Lord put a mark on Cain, lest any who came upon him should kill him. Then Cain went away from the presence of the Lord and dwelt in the land of Nod, east of Eden. The mark of Cain is a mark of protection. It's kind of curious that people sometimes take that as a bad thing, but literally it's a mark put on Cain's head that is a sign of the protection of God. Even though Cain is going away from the presence of the Lord because Cain murdered his brother, God protects him even so. Okay. But again, also there's that thing about anyone who finds me might kill me, but so far as we have been told, if this were a newspaper account, there are literally two other people, Adam and Eve, his parents, and yeah, it's not overly likely they are going to kill him. Okay. And then, yada yada, you get various people. You get Adam's descendants to Noah. The, where's the, Sons of Shem, where's the, I'm looking for the Nephilim. Oh, yeah, here we go. Here we go. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God came into the daughters of men, and they bore children to them. These were the mighty men that were of old, the men of renown. Okay, so right here, you have the Nephilim, and you have the sons of God, which generally is taken to be angels. But in any event, these are clearly not human beings, and this is clearly describing interbreeding of things which are not human beings with human beings, creating various, various sort of quasi-monsters, but the men of renown of old. And so, again, there's a clear description within this text that this text is not describing everything, and there's other stuff going on too. This text is only describing the important parts. So I just want to bring that again. The text very clearly that describes how, oh yeah, and there were these other things that were going on at the time. Also, by the way, Cain went, dwelt in the land of Nod, east of Eden. Cain knew his wife, and she conceived and bore Enoch. What wife? If this is a newspaper account, okay? If this is a newspaper account, what wife did he have? See, I'm sorry. One of the other things that you'll see come up, by the way, is, evolution proves that there aren't just one, first man and a first woman, and, because obviously there's no, I've never heard of bottlenecking before. I'm speaking in the mouth of the atheist. There's no such thing as bottlenecking before, and, also I don't understand the concept of, like, one species turning into another. There's got to be some line when it is and when it isn't a member of this species, and, yeah, so, obviously all groups, as they're turning into a new species, definitely all shift at the same time. They all mutate in the same ways, even though, according to my theory, the mutations are all random. But, whenever one species turns into another, there definitely is nothing along the lines of one of them mutates into the new species, and then that's more successful and carries on its descendants. There's always lots of large numbers of them as a subgroup all move in the same direction at the same time, because, I don't understand my own theory. Anyway, which is not to say that you don't have shifts of entire populations in a direction because of selective pressures, but leaving that out of account for the moment, because that just the gradual accumulation of changes under selective pressures is only one small part of the actual evolutionary history of things, because there's also mutation, etc. Okay, this is again where we get to that thing about all live human beings, as science has discovered, do actually have common ancestors. Y chromosome Adam and mitochondrial Eve, who, by the way, don't actually are common ancestors. Mitochondrial Eve is a common ancestor of all living people that have been studied, and Y chromosome Adam is also, although not at the same time as mitochondrial Eve, by the way, much more recent, actually, is a male ancestor of all males that exist, because you can look through changes in the Y chromosome that males have, which females don't, and trace that back to a common ancestor. Memory serves, and I haven't looked up the specifics in so long, Y chromosome Adam is probably like 180,000 years ago, and Y chromosome Adam is like 180,000 years ago, and mitochondrial Eve is like 300,000 years ago or something. fairly long time ago, but the scientific evidence does point to all of the living people having common ancestors. But also what you see within the book of Genesis, if you look, is in fact there's a description of how there are other people around that can be mated with other than Adam and Eve, because if you were to take this as a newspaper account, the only woman who exists at the time Cain is described as knowing his wife is Eve, and she's already Adam's wife. So you can't take this as a newspaper account, and the book actually describes how there are other people around as candidates to be intermarried with, but Adam and Eve are the ancestors of all the living. Okay, now, what do we get to next? Noah, the flood of Noah. Okay, so again, it describes how all the world is flooded, but here's the thing. There is no reason to take this as not being a... okay, so the word world in itself is a world that always has a bunch of shades of meaning, unless you're talking to extremely modern people who don't forget how they actually normally speak the English language anyway. So you will find people who take the word world to mean literally the globe, the planet Earth, and who think that this is the only thing that the word world means until they hear the phrase something like, they came from different worlds. Meaning that, like, in the context of like a movie where you have like, the rich girl and the poor boy who meet each other and fall in love, that they came from different worlds. And, then even a modern will remember that the word world doesn't mean that one of these two came from a different planet than the planet Earth. The word world, all the world and so on. World tends to have a meaning, something along the lines of like everything you interact with. It can refer to the like entire globe, although that's a somewhat semi-modern meaning of it, basically after you start getting real interested in astronomy, in particular in modern astronomy. But anyway, and probably a lot of it actually comes from science fiction, which you have to remember doesn't really exist before about the late 1800s. Anyhow, point here being, there's just so much detail to get through. I understand that. I'm trying to keep going because there's a lot of detail here, and I'm trying to head off a lot of ways that one can go wrong from this without bogging things down too much. And I'm a little frustrated because I know that I'm failing because I always digress too much. So I apologize for that. Anyway, so the point here being that when we talk about the flood of Noah, that the entire area flooding and lots of things being killed, it is entirely a very valid meaning. You could also look, depending upon the particular time you're looking at, and if we're talking actually of the of what's going on relative to our most recent common ancestors. So if Eve is indeed mitochondrial Eve, or one of her ancestors, and Adam being the mate of Eve that way, because Y chromosome Adam, by the way, and that's why you have to actually preface, is just the most recent common ancestor, that in no way says that there wasn't a previous common ancestor, some of his children having died out. And what do we come across? What's that? Natural disasters killing off a large fraction of all of the people that exist, including all these people who've been described as being intermarried and so on. And, what's left are the descendants of Adam and Eve. Huh. Curious. Anyway, moving on. Part of the problem too, and part of why I'm saying this in a slightly, in the way that I am, which probably is not the tone. It may well not come across, I'm realizing in the moment, in the manner that I mean it. So just to explain the way I mean that tone, is that there are a vast many possible ways of interpreting things. And if you're familiar with the particulars of a lot of the evolutionary stuff about how there are various hominins that then, die off either in natural disasters or in other ways, and we don't really know exactly why they die off and stuff. What we are seeing here is the die-off of things other than those descended from Adam and Eve. So the degree to which these things are directly reconcilable with each other, if you don't want to phrase it as agree with each other, is rather remarkable. There are a lot of different ways you could work it out, though, in terms of the details, because we just don't have most of the details. What were the actual early hominins like? Things that look skeletally like human beings, that is. how did they act, etc., etc., etc. What was their relationship, etc. These things are all very murky and very shrouded in the mists of time. A lot, by the way, of the things that you will see claimed as fact, if you actually trace them down to their source, are actually properly speculations, statistical interpretations of particular things, etc., etc. Yeah. Anyway, there are, if you properly study the scientific fields, and they're really actually quite interesting. So, I mean, if you have the time, I recommend it. The thing is, if you actually do that, an awful lot of what gets described within popular science as fact is speculation and statistical inference and other things where these are vastly more subject. The details of what's going on are vastly more subject to revision than people tend to make out. It doesn't really much matter, because even the popular versions, for the most part, are very reconcilable, but it's a little bit frustrating how much, if you study the particulars are murky and subject to change, and yeah, so okay, so anyway, moving on. So we have, there's the flood of Noah, which, if you want to take the part about Noah as history, a really bad local flood that goes absolutely everywhere you might possibly go and kills stuff over a very wide area is all extremely tenable as a local flood. You can also take the description of Noah. Noah might well have lived, there might well have been a specific Noah who lived through a specific flood in exactly the way described, etc., with the ark, etc. And this could still be symbolic. His particular struggles can also be symbolic of all of the various natural disasters that killed off all of the various things, like, that thing about the Nephilim, and etc. Yeah. Okay, so it could have been the reason why those aren't still around. Now, so you have the flood of Noah. As I said, I'm not trying to get into the theological interpretations of it, and it doesn't much matter to my present purpose whether the part describing Noah is mythology or whether the part describing Noah is history. With saying like the flood filled the whole world is the sort of thing that even within a history, that's a good enough description for a massive flood over anywhere you might possibly get to from where you were. Okay, so in any event, right here you have what is biologically known as a bottlenecking event, by the way. And hey, look, mitochondrial Eve, which, oh, by the way, is one of the reasons why I mentioned that if Eve could be an ancestor of mitochondrial Eve, because, for example, mitochondrial Eve could be Noah's wife, in whom everyone's descended from her, but again, there was a previous common ancestor as well prior to that bottlenecking event. So, again, to actually work out the details is the sort of thing that people could spend their entire lives on, working out the details of what happened in terms of the specific details of history. No one presently knows in the scientific history of the thing. So, working out exactly what bottlenecking events there were, because if you have one, a bottlenecking event intrinsically removes the evidence of previous bottlenecking events. So, working this out is one of those things that is just unimaginably difficult from a scientific perspective. How many bottlenecking events had there been prior to mitochondrial Eve, etc., is, you're not going to find out the details in any reasonable way, and certainly not before, like, anyone presently live at the time I'm recording this video is going to die. So, anyway, it's so much work. It's so underappreciated how incredibly much work the scientific research here is to find out the details. And it just annoys me to no end, the various people who try to pretend those details have all been worked out, in complete disregard to all of the hard work of the people doing it and all the hard work of the people still working on trying to do all of this anthropology and so on. Okay, so you also get the story. So we're getting very soon, because we're going to be to Abraham, where the book of Genesis turns from mythology to possibly history / with mythology intermixed to the history of Abraham, at which point we actually are getting history. But nobody has any questions regarding evolution, etc. Once you start with Abraham. So kind of coming to the end of what we're talking about here. Okay, and then the final part really is the... there are two things, actually, I should say, because they're the genealogies. And there's the Tower of Babel. So a quick thing about the genealogies. The thing about genealogies, again, is genealogies, in general, they have a symbolic value. They are utterly and shockingly uninteresting, apart from their symbolic value. There are, in the modern context where we are very concerned with the exact times that someone was born and when they died and how old they were, etc., and who exactly is descended from whom, you find a tiny subset of people who actually do this for their own family trees and go back and see, like, who were all of my ancestors and what's known about them. And they can get pretty impressive. Like, there are people who can go back a few hundred years. This is a hobby like stamp collecting. It is very, very rare, and it is phenomenally boring to everybody but the person who has this particular interest, because there's no reason to do it. It doesn't communicate any information. Oh, there was a person who had this name, and we know nothing about him. Who is descended from another person who had this name, and other than, like, how long he lived, we know nothing about him. Who is descended from this person, and other than how long he lived, we know nothing about him, etc. Genealogies, in the modern sense, have no purpose. Genealogies, in the ancient sense, serve to communicate things like, yeah, a really long time happened between here and here, but there is a line of continuity that that Abraham is a descendant of Adam and Eve. That there is a line of continuity here, but it's a really, really long line of continuity. Abraham is not the son of Noah. And there's a huge amount. You can add it up, as people will do, and you come up with, I forget how many thousands of years, 1 or 2,000, 3,000, somewhere like that, between Noah and Abraham. But the point is, in anything but a modern sense, that the time between Abraham and Noah is very long. It's very big, but there is a continuity. So the genealogies serve an ancient purpose to establish this continuity, to establish there was, however, a really long line between in which basically nothing is known. Because, like, yeah, they're names, but, like, that's it. That's pretty much the only thing. I mean, look, I'm going to reach the tiniest little bit. The sons of Japheth: Gomer, Magog, Madai, Javan, Tubal, Mesech, and Teras. The sons of Gomer: Ashkenaz, Ripath, and Togarmah. The sons of Javan: from these the coastland people spread. These are the sons of Japheth and their lands, each with his own language. The sons of Ham: Cush, Egypt, put Canaan. The sons of Cush, etc., etc. So, like, there are explanations of how, like, various peoples are descended from Noah, and you come to Shem and the descendants of Shem. And here's the one that actually connects, by the way, or that has a timing associated with it. These are the descendants of Shem. When Shem was 100 years old, he became the father of Arpachshad 2 years after the flood. And Shem lived after the birth of Arpachshad 500 years and had other sons and daughters. When Arpachshad had lived 35 years, he became the father of Shelah. And Arpachshad lived after the birth of Shelah 403 years and had other sons and daughters. When Shelah had lived 30 years, he became the father of Eber. And Shelah lived after the birth of Eber 403 years and had other sons and daughters. When Eber had lived 34 years, he became the father of Peleg. Eber lived after the birth of Peleg 430 years and had other sons and daughters. When Peleg, and so on. Okay? We don't know anything about these people. We're just given how long they lived. And this, by the way, is in contrast. How long they lived is in contrast with Adam's descendants to Noah. When Seth had lived 105 years, he became the father of Enosh. Seth lived after the birth of Enosh 807 years and had other sons and daughters. Thus all the days of Seth were 912 years, and he died. There is something really fascinating in there. There is Enoch. Enoch is very interesting because when Enoch had lived, because it's keeps on going. Thus, these were all the days of whomever, and he died. When Enoch had lived 65 years, he became the father of Methuselah. Enoch walked with God after the birth of Methuselah 300 years, and had other sons and daughters. Thus, all the days of Enoch were 365 years. Enoch walked with God, and he was not, for God took him. And then Methuselah lived 187 years, became the father of Lamech. Methuselah lived after the birth of Lamech 782 years, and had other sons and daughters. Thus, all the days of Methuselah were 969 years, and he died. So you keep having that, and he died. So there's something interesting here within this, that you have the people in the beginning, after the fall, still lived a very long time. And it was not complete degeneration. So you have Enoch, who instead of dying was taken by God, although he's not around nearly as long as the rest. Once we get to after the flood, we're seeing the degeneration because they're only living like 400 years. Then eventually the length of people's lives gets shortened to the current lifespan. So the thing about about these is that trying to date things by them is to use them for a purpose that they're not meant for, because they communicate some things about how long people lived, and how there are things like degeneration, how there are exceptions to someone dying, how there is a continuity between things, how there is a really, really long time in between many of these events, so that you have an important event, then a very long time, and then another event. And lots of stuff happened, and it all is important, but none of it's described. And so these serve to space things out tremendously, so you have no idea what's going on in between these things, and so that it functions in many ways as a very long time later. Except it's a genealogy, because you have genealogies as a literary thing. So it's not in any way saying that the genealogy is simply wrong to say that it's a literary device used to communicate massive spans of time without knowing anything, but with having a continuity, such that you're not talking about a new species coming up later. Okay, final thing, the Tower of Babel. Okay, now the whole earth had one language and few words. And as men migrated from the east, they found a plain in the land of Shinar and settled there. And they said to one another, "Come, let us make bricks and burn them thoroughly." And they had brick for stone and bitumen for mortar. And they said, "Come, let us build ourselves a city and a tower with its top in the heavens, and let us make a name for ourselves, lest we be scattered abroad upon the face of the whole earth." And the Lord came down to see the city and the tower which the sons of men had built. And the Lord said, "Behold, they are one people, and they have all one language. And this is only the beginning of what they will do, and nothing that they propose to do will now be impossible for them. Come, let us go down there and confuse their language, that they may not understand one another's speech." So the Lord scattered them abroad from there over the face of all the earth, and they left off building the city. Therefore its name was called Babel, because the Lord there confused the language of all the earth, and from there the Lord scattered them abroad over the face of all the earth. Next is the Shem. So, yeah, so it's so richly symbolic. It's painful even to hear the idea of taking this as a newspaper account, as if it was just like a curious thing that happened. The Tower of Babel, it's in this. Okay, there's a really, really, really fascinating meaning to it. And there's the thing, when the Lord says, "Now nothing will be impossible to them," you can see what is foreshadowed. When everybody speaks the same language and is able to work together to the same ends, and they are fallen human beings, in the unimaginable number of people who are murdered in the 20th century. Because what do you have in the 20th century? You have massive nations, bigger than had ever existed before. You have things like Germany, which you have to remember was basically created in the late 1800s out of a whole collection of kingdoms. But now you had one giant nation ruled together, everyone speaking the same and everyone able to work together. And what did it do? It murdered millions of people. And you have the Soviet Union, this giant empire where everyone spoke Russian. And what did it do? It murdered even more people. And you had China united together. And what happened when you had Mao ruling China? What was he able to do because he had this bureaucracy that worked, and you were able to do things over such giant and vast regions because people spoke the same language and had a political structure to work together? He murdered millions of people. What happened? Look at things like the invention of the atomic bomb, which is only possible because so many people spoke the same language. And I mean, in a very literal sense, if you look up the history of the Manhattan Project, these people did not all even come from the same place. They were all able to, they learned a common language in English and were able to all speak English to each other. And thus these many physicists who all worked out together how the atomic bomb works in the Manhattan Project were able to bring about the atomic bomb because they all spoke together, because they were all working together. You were able to take over vast swaths of people, the most brilliant people in very particular narrow ways, who all had a gift in a particular, for a particular kind of physics at the same time, and get them together, and they're able to work together to create unimaginable horrors. So there's a kind of fascinating thing that is going on here, where the scattering of people, where the disuniting of people, serves to protect people from each other. And there's a callback, actually, here, by the way. One of the things right after the fall that God did was he gave Adam and Eve loincloths made of leather. They at first fashioned loincloths for themselves, aprons, loincloths. There's one Hebrew word that describes all sorts of things you can cover. One of them being the sort of armor that men would wear into battle to avoid castration, which is, you can see the similarity to an apron, which is there to protect you, and to a skirt, and so on, which is again there to protect you in different ways. But they're all very similar things. And so the thing about it, God gave them these made of leather. They made ones of fig leaves. What do fig leaves protect you from? Approximately nothing. Bugs, maybe. Depending. What does leather protect you from? A heck of a lot more than fig leaves. And so what do you see? You see God essentially telling Adam and Eve, right in the beginning of the sin, or right after they sinned, the beginning of the time after the fall, that, like, essentially, look, if you're going to try to live without me, you're going to have to do a better job than this, because you need to stay alive long enough for me to actually save you. And so God protects them and prolongs them so that they will be able to stay alive long enough to be saved in order to continue the work of creation, in order to carry it through to the point where it can be redeemed. So again, here in the Tower of Babel, you see people have different languages. Why do they have different languages? Well, people have different languages because it actually protects people from each other, because they're not able to get together and work tremendous evil because they speak different languages. One of the reasons to be worried about the modern age, wherein so many people can speak the same language, and you can do things like form Twitter mobs to attack random people because everyone speaks the same language, and you can gather together so many people for evil ends. So it definitely is a cautionary tale whenever you hear people in the tech sector talk about, we're going to bring people together, we're going to use technology to unite people. Something always to be very cautious and worried about there. Because when you bring people together, they may not be good. Now, the other thing there too, so like again, there may well be a particular historical event of a whole bunch of people who were, was it east of the land of Shinar? They migrated and as men migrated from the east, they found a plain in the land of Shinar and settled there. So, I mean, maybe it did. It could literally have happened. There's no reason to think that it didn't. That people there were building a tower, and then they got confused in their languages in one way or another. Lots of ways it could happen, including direct miracle. And so the thing about this, now the placing of this at a particular time, if there's no way you can place this close to Abraham, basically, and still, especially, actually, you can't place it this close to Abraham and have all the people there. And you can't take this to be in literally this order within this time period, because you have way too little time for all the different people who didn't speak the same languages in all the different places by the time of Abraham. You're not going to really, I mean, if you really, really try, you can probably make it out to work. But one of the things you notice about this is it describes itself as, it describes something as a very, very early event, and it doesn't work in its, it doesn't work in its time period, and it doesn't matter in its time period. It does have to happen after Noah, but if you take these genealogies and so on, you're going to be in some strange mental gymnastics, but there's no reason to take it to mean that, because this is very clearly a self-contained story about a particular and important truth that we need to know, but it doesn't make sense in terms of the the actual temporal proximity, if you look at it in this way. So, I mean, I don't think there's there's no need to take it in that temporal proximity. And in terms of the evolution of languages, language is a kind of interesting subject. But in terms of the evolution of languages and speaking of different languages, it's got its issues. But it also had, it's got its issues if you were trying to reconcile it in this exact time period. As, if you count out the genealogy before Abraham. But if you take it as being a description of why did God order the world in such a way that people spoke many different languages and people were not united, that this protects people, and especially because one of the themes that you see here is that there is after the fall, you see a degeneration, and it gets so bad that God wipes out the worst of what had happened, and then allows things to proceed again from the best of what was left within how things had degenerated. But that, and that roughly-ish from the time of Noah, after that sort of great reset that God did by wiping out a large fraction of the degenerates, of the degeneration, things gradually are in the direction of God starting to save the world. And we come after a while finally to Abraham, where God now is really entering history with the foundation of the Jewish people, who will eventually save the world. That the savior of the world will be a descendant of Abraham. And so you have the gradual reformation of the world, starting with Abraham. That now God is actively, that the world had been created. There was the fall, where things went wrong. Then God, God is sort of is working within history. God has a plan, obviously, is then working through, and then you see at some point the first place where you can really see the plan that is easily intelligible to human beings of reforming the world, of making the world a new creation, is when you look at the story of Abraham. And so what is the story of the Tower of Babel doing? It's saying that after this reset, things had been getting so bad, degenerating to such a degree that God reset things, eliminating a large fraction of the degeneration. And then as a protective measure, because it comes right after the flood, God scattered people so they couldn't work together, so they could not spread their evil all around in such a way. And then in that confused state, you see God working through history in the person of Abraham and his descendants to remake the world, to bring about the new creation that will undo the fall of man and bring about salvation. And so you see that beginning, and so the world was sort of prepared for that to happen. That it's not that Abraham was no accident, but that God prepared the world for Abraham, so that Abraham could then be called and answer the call of the Lord, and through him, salvation would come to the world. So the Tower of Babel fits here very, very well in terms of the ordering of things, that after great calamities, that people were scattered and people were, to use a absurd modern term, disempowered, so that the ground could be prepared for Abraham to come and bring salvation, and from his descendants to bring salvation to the world. So, yeah, the story fits perfectly in salvation history in terms of the general sequence of events. The exact time between these things, because you have another genealogy that connects him to Abraham, that connects Noah to Abraham, and the time frame of the genealogy again is like with the other genealogies, a really long time, but there is a continuity as well as a very long time in which you don't know what happened. So, that's the thing. Like, it doesn't make sense to take this as a newspaper account that's wrong, because it's not like a newspaper account. It doesn't do any good as a newspaper account. But if you take this part in that mythological way, that it is a narrative conveyance of the important truths of the world in a way that people can actually understand, it is phenomenal. I mean, there's a reason Jordan Peterson is so absolutely taken with this as a book on psychology, and full of, psychological insights. I mean, it's made as a guidebook for fallen humanity to be able to learn from. So, that's no accident. So, if you take it as the thing which it is, which it clearly is meant to be, is you take it as that genre wherein everything is very natural and the thing works phenomenally well, as opposed to take it to be in a strictly modern genre in which the thing is abysmal, and this genre didn't exist back when. I mean, there was such thing as an account, like a person just like writing out an account of a thing. I mean, I don't mean literally that no one ever wrote an account of anything, or no one ever told an account of anything just to transport the experience of seeing something. But that's not. They didn't survive. You don't find lots of people copying over, because I mean, remember that everything written down thousands of years ago had to be copied and recopied as the material upon which they were written, especially if it was paper, degenerated. But even if it is leather and so on, you have to copy these things and recopy them. If they're on scrolls, you have to take them as they're getting old and brittle and recopy them onto new things. And who the heck is going to spend the time to essentially copy out old newspaper stories? No one. No one's going to do that. They're going to copy out the important stuff. And so the genres that anyone cared about, the modern age where, you have microfilm and everything's digitized, then like, okay, sure, like you can look up old newspaper stories because like it's all but free to keep the old ones. And they're of, some minor interest. Given that they're practically free to copy in the digital age, we might as well. The number of periodicals and stuff that were lost to time, by the way, if you ever try to do historical research, is really high. And even the ones that aren't lost to time, they're often like there's a copy or two copies in particular libraries or whatever, and they charge you a whole lot of money to go there because like almost no one does, so they need a lot of money from the few people who do actually want to go see this stuff to do it, but the universities work out deals amongst each other. Anyway, point being, the book of Genesis, if you consider it in its proper genre of the first part of the book of Genesis before we get to the history of Abraham, if we consider it in its proper genre of the sort of genre that anyone ever bothered copying down from the ancient world, of transmitting, of keeping, and so on, and don't try to take it as a peculiarly modern genre that we keep around only because our technology has made this sort of stuff so cheap. It all fits beautifully with all the science that anyone actually knows. It'll never fit with all the speculations because, wrong speculations won't fit with the truth, or won't necessarily fit with the truth anyway. But there are plenty of bad speculations that exist. But as long as you separate out things that are known or at least likely to be true and, highly likely to be true, from just rampant speculation and so on, it fits beautifully. As I know in this phenomenally too long video, I hope I have described in at least enough detail to follow and do the rest of the work for yourself. Because, obviously I didn't do a great job here. I'm only sketching things out in some detail to show you how to finish it out, but, to work all this out would require an unbelievably long series of spending tremendous amounts of time on every little detail because it'll bring in so much scientific work that'll take a very long time to go into and so on. And so all told, I wish I had made a better video. I wish I had made a shorter video. I wish I had made a longer video in another sense. And Yeah, I'm sorry this wasn't better. I hope that it helps. And until next time, may you hit everything you aim at.